want to say it's been great being able to get home, but Patricia and I just spent a couple weeks in England visiting with her family. She has has a brother that lives over there, and a niece and two nephews that we got to visit for a little bit. And then I went and I got to do something that was extremely fun. I got to study in Oxford, and I got to study C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, as well as some other books that you're probably familiar with, as well as where J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and to see where their inspiration came from. And so that was fun, as well as exciting. And also I got to see where a lot of the Harry Potter movies were filmed too while I was there. So as we were beginning, I wasn't trying to prepare for the sermon when we got to O'Hare, and I looked at Patricia and saw that her bag wasn't in the car, and I looked at her and said, "Where's your bag?" And she looked at me and said, "You didn't pack it." Fortunately, the bag did show up, and we didn't have to go on trying to test what it meant to carry no bag or purse or anything. The Lord be with you. There are a couple of different ways that I was kind of looking at this text this morning. First off, the part where Jesus tells us to go out and to work on that harvest. And what does that mean, and how a harvest can take some time. The second part is towards the end where Jesus says, wipe the dirt off of your feet. Because when you share something with someone and they don't receive it, we need to get rid of that. And so there's two different areas that I want to look at this morning in our text. And I want to start by saying I remember well those years, about 7.5 years ago, when we, as a church, decided to set out and start GPS. Now, those few weeks in February leading up to the actual launch of GPS, we were sent out. There's a couple of us that went out to knock on doors and just invite people. To say, hey, there's this new church that's starting up, that we're starting from grace, and we're starting this place, and we're going to have this new worshiping community right here in your midst. But I remember going out and knocking on those doors. The air was crisp and cool some days. There was some sunshine on a few occasions. There was one Saturday where we're out there, we're walking from house to house, and there's snow just falling all around. And so as we were walking, shoes would slip on the asphalt as we were going up and down the hills of some of the neighborhoods. When we'd get from one house to the next, the snow was falling so fast that there'd be like an inch of snow just kind of resting on us, and we'd have to shake off so as to not look like the abominable snowman as we knocked on the door. But we were knocking, we were sharing, we were inviting, we were going out. A lot of people were excited about what was happening, even if they already had a church home. One woman I talked to, I looked at and I said, "We're from Grace and we're starting this new church." She said, "Oh, I'm already part of a church." I'm like, "Cool, which one?" And she called back to her husband because she couldn't quite remember. And her husband said, "Oh, it's Grace Lutheran." And I just kind of laughed at that. Both of us did, thank goodness. But there was people that were excited. Something was happening. I remember, though, one guy who was working on his car with a friend. I just simply went up and asked. I said, "Hey, we're from Grace Lutheran. We're starting this. Here's the brochure. Any questions?" He just kind of looked at the brochure, looked at me, just kind of gave me a little smirk and said, He was polite about it. He was nice about it. He wasn't aggressive or angry. But he made it clear that at that point in time, God's peace would not rest on him. It would not rest there. The invitation was made. And I hope that a seed of curiosity was planted. It wouldn't be until recently that I would start to understand from personal experience how these seeds of curiosity, these seeds of faith, these seeds of invitation need to be planted and nurtured over time. It takes some persistence and patience for the harvest to be ripened and ready. And I don't mean like the persistence of a mother nagging their child to get them to eat their vegetables. I mean the persistence of revisiting the topic over time, and being okay with it. It was about 3 years ago that I had met Shannon Sheffield from the Harlem Community Center, or HCC, and we were working on a community project. And it was at that first meeting, after we kind of got done, that she invited me and a couple of the other people there to attend Rotary, which she's a huge part of. And being the person that I am, I politely smiled, I nodded, I asked questions, and, at least tried to appear interested. And said, that sounds interesting. Maybe I'll try to make it out there. I never did. About a year and a half later, I was sitting at the table, and lo and behold, there's Shannon Sheffield sitting across the table from me, and we started to talk a little bit, and once again, she planted she brought up that little bit of soil around me and said, you know what? Why haven't I seen you at Rotary yet? And I'd kind of made my obligatory, oh, yes, that sounded so interesting. That's so neat. When is it again? Maybe I'll show up. I never did. I didn't make it. Then it was a year later. So now we're talking 3 years in the making. And I was getting ready for the Pinnacle Awards dinner, a luncheon again, to attend there. And this time something different. Instead of thinking, oh goodness, I'm going to see Shannon again, I started thinking to myself and thinking about how am I going to blow her off this time. I'm tired of telling her no. But this time, instead of thinking that, I started thinking, you know what? I'm kind of ready to look a little bit deeper into what Rotary's about. But I'm not going to just jump in and head there just because, I want to make sure that I'm invited again. I wanted to hear that invitation yet one more time, to make sure that there was no resentment between me and her for having blown her off for the last 3 years, but to know that it was okay to join. I needed to be invited one more time. My curiosity was at that, ripe for the picking. It was ready for being harvested. And again, I saw Shannon at the luncheon, and once again, she invited me to join her at Rotary. And I made the commitment and have followed through. You see, her persistence, her patience, her continuously asking me had paid off. Isn't it amazing how long that took? It took 3 years to even visit the club. I think we have a lot to learn about the way that people move sometimes into our midst and how we need to be persistent in nudging people along. At my class, someone brought up the point that they said nowadays it's probably 4 years and 7 asks or 7 points of contact before people are willing to make a move into church or a step into faith or Christianity. 4 years and 7 points of contact. That's once every 6 months for the next 4 years. So if you have someone in your mind that you're saying, I want to invite them, think about that. Every 6 months, just politely asking to say, you really should join me at church. And maybe in 3.5 years' time, they'll be ready to join you. Their lives might have changed. Something different might have happened. They might be ready to join. They might be ready for the harvest. But most importantly, as you're asking and being persistent and patient in your asking, and you're telling about your faith, and you're telling about what God has done for you, remember that when they don't join, when they don't particularly listen to you, remember that it's not about you. You can speak your piece, but the decision to listen, the decision to act is ultimately up to them. Like those guys who were working on that car that day who handed the brochure back, I quickly understood that it wasn't me that they were rejecting. It wasn't about me. It was the one who sent me and the one who sent him that they were rejecting. It was God that they were rejecting. It was not me being rejected. And when we start to ask people to join us at church or share the gospel or share our own thoughts or ideas or our frustrations with them, it's not us that's being rejected. It's the ideas or they're not ready to listen. It takes time. And just like other people who we have no control over, they have no control over our own actions. And Jesus addresses this very clearly when he tells us that as you leave a town and the town rejects you or the town says no, puts up the walls and the barriers, he says, wipe the dust from your feet. He's saying, let it go. You spoke your piece, now move on. You've put it out there, now get over it and move on. Don't carry that resentment which is dirtying your life, which is soiling you. Don't carry that with you. So I want to move to another area where we share with people our feelings, our perspectives, but get angry when those we share with continue to go about their lives as if nothing was ever said to them, or it creates distance between the two people. Over the last couple months, I've heard frustrations and anger and resentment from people who have been hurt by others and their decisions, or have become frustrated with someone when they do not seem to be listening to their counsel. I walked with one girl whose mother had left her with her father. Her mother was now distant and for the most part out of the picture, but had come in at different intersections of her life. But she was kept at a distance, and this made the daughter very angry because she was unable to spend time with her mother. As I talked with the daughter, she began to pour out her heart, her hurts, and her frustrations, of the pains in her life, of what her mother's choices had caused for her. She started telling me about how she felt like her mother had chosen alcohol, and this alcohol was causing some severe health effects. And her mother was around. She felt further avoided, causing a sense of rejection. When we feel that others are choosing something over us, while we might still seek for them to be with us, it just might never happen. But it needs to be understood that we have no control over their life. And the dust that seems to be caking on us needs to be shaken off. Or like the grime that sticks to you and makes you feel dirty and irritates you, it will start to consume you and cover your whole life, soiling every other aspect of your life. And there was Joe. Joe, a couple weeks ago, started telling me about his father and this new woman in his father's life. He started telling me about how this woman was unhealthy for his father and played into his father's slight mental illness of depression. And this person was frustrated with his father's choice of a mate. He was growing angry about it because he felt like he wasn't being listened to and was often getting into arguments with both his father and his father's new love. And they butted heads all the time. Joe continued to speak his mind about his feelings, but he felt like he wasn't getting through, and furthermore, he was separating himself from his father. It was his father's decision who he spent his life with, and it was Joe's to decide who whose life he was spending, or who he was spending his life with. So it remains that Joe had already spoken his mind, and wanted his father to accept it. But Joe needed to accept his father's choice, and as his father's, especially if Joe desired to maintain his relationship with his father. At least he needed to be cordial with his father's newfound love. Shaking the dust of his father's decision will allow Joe to move forward with life and will allow him to continue a relationship with his father. And this could easily be switched up to a parent not approving of their child's relationships. You see, the dust can get so thick on people at times that a person's whole life and view revolves around the decisions of others that are uncontrolled by us. The decision of choosing drugs or alcohol, who a person is dating, financial decisions, business decisions, or other decisions like relational decisions that might have an impact on you, but they're not our decisions to make. We can give our 2 cents and plant a seed, maybe nurture the seed a little along the way, and be there when they need us the most. You see, the disciples were sent to plant seeds and harvest them as they became ripened. They were sent to rely on God, and they were told to shake the dust off when people refused to listen, especially since it was not about them being rejected. It was other choices that were being made. So today, what dust do you need to shake off in order to look to the future? And who was it that you planted the seed of faith in, but have not followed up with in a while? Amen. Let us stand together and confess our faith.